Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of this mini web tutorial. If you haven't checked out the HTML one, then be sure to check that out before this one because that's a direct prerequisite to this video. So in our last video, we created this HTML tutorial.html. Now we're going to create a new file. And we're just going to call this CSS tutorial.html. Then we're going to enter in all of our basic tags. So HTML, head, and then body. Okay, and now we are going to have an h1 tag that says welcome. And then we are going to have a p that says enter your name. And then we're going to have input type equals text. Then we're just going to copy and paste this. And we're going to have an enter your age. Now, if we go to our CSS tutorial, make sure you don't open your HTML tutorial because that one won't work. We're just going to change this to CSS. You're going to see this enter your name and this enter your age. And then after that, we're going to type in button, display your name, and then we're just going to make 3 of these. We're going to have display your age, and then both. Now if we refresh, you'll see that our template is here. So now that we have the HTML created, now we're going to focus on making it look good with CSS. So that's basically the whole point of CSS, is just making HTML look good and positioned properly. So to start off, we're going to have an enter your name here, but then we want our input box to be to the side of it. Same with this one. We want enter your age here. And then we want our input box to be to the right of it. So in order to do that, we're going to actually group these into their own containers. So I just opened this in Paint to sort of give you a better idea of what we're going to be doing. I'm just going to drag these down here. And then I'm going to drag this over here. Too bad it's not this easy to program our HTML and CSS. Okay, so in order to do this, we are going to need to create containers and tell them exactly what to do. So a container is basically called a div, and we're going to have a div around each one of these. It's a bit too thick. Around each one of these. But it's invisible. You won't actually be able to see the div. But we're going to create one around each one of these containers. Okay. So now that we have our div created in Paint, we can specify exactly what we want to do. So we can say everything in this container, make it move horizontal. Now we had to separate it into their own containers because if they weren't and you said make everything horizontal, it would just end up making everything go side by side. But we don't want that. We want 3 separate containers and everything inside them to be horizontal. So we're going to go back to our CSS tutorial.html and we're going to type in a div tag. Oops. And then we're going to put our p and our input inside of the div tag. And then we're going to do the exact same thing down here. And then once again for the buttons. Now let's refresh our page, make sure everything's good. So you'll notice too, when we put everything in divs, it automatically made everything on a new line. So the buttons are no longer up by here. In our first video, we used these BRs. This is actually really bad and we never want to be using BRs. I did it as an example because as you can see, we only had a few options and we already have like 10 BRs. So that would get out of hand. So we're not going to use BR, we're going to actually use CSS in order to fix that instead. But it's important to note that we haven't actually used any CSS yet. Everything in this file is still HTML, including the divs. It's just an HTML tag. So I'm going to start showing you guys what CSS is. So we're going to right click and we're going to click new file and we're just going to type in CSS tutorial.css. And then in our head file and our .html file, we're going to type in link rel equals style sheet, and then href equals css tutorial.css. So this is what is linking our HTML page to our CSS file. So this has to be done perfectly. If you put the css tutorial.css in a different folder, it will no longer work unless you change the href to match that folder. So in CSS, we can reference HTML tags by their type, their class, and their ID. So I'm going to show you what all those things are. First, we're going to go with type, or just tag. So for example, if I go to our css tutorial.css, I'll just make a few new lines and type in body. And make sure you use these brackets correctly. If I type in background color, background-color, colon, and you'll see Visual Studio Code automatically gives me a pretty big list of these. I'm just going to click Alice Blue, which should be the top one. Now if we save, and then we refresh our page, you'll notice that the background has that color to it. And the reason this is working is because we typed in body, we have this body tag, and we linked to our CSS. So now our CSS is saying, okay, take this body tag and set its background color to Alice Blue. The next way that we can use CSS is using an ID. So we can type in ID equals welcome-header. This can be named whatever you want, but they have to be referenced the same in HTML and CSS. So our ID is welcome header. So we're going to use the ID tag, which is just a pound sign. And then we're going to type in welcome-header. And now we're going to say font-size is, let's just say 25 pixels. And now if we refresh our page, you'll see that it's actually smaller. So now we can go and type in like 28 pixels. And you know what, I want it to be a little bit bigger. So we're going to type in 29 pixels. And as you can see, this is extremely annoying. So I'm going to show you a better way to do this. So if we right click our welcome, and then we click inspect, you're going to see our HTML is on the side. Now you can do this for any website, so people can see your HTML code, so be careful. Now you'll notice that we have this ID welcome header and our font size of 29. We can actually manipulate everything on this, and I can say, you know what, I want it to be about 55. So now I know what I want the font size to be without having to go back to Visual Studio multiple times. However, this doesn't actually save it because you're just referencing what's already been loaded. So if we refresh the page, it will revert back to normal. So we do have to go and add that value into Visual Studio once we figured out what it is. And as you can see, it's exactly what it was before. So remember, this isn't quite as complicated as it looks. We have this ID of welcome header, and then we reference the ID, and we didn't type in ID because CSS ID means the pound sign, and then we just changed it font size. So you could say, well, why didn't we just type in H1? Because technically we could just do that. We could type in H1 the same way that we did body, and it would be the exact same thing. And the reason why is because we don't want to affect all H1 tags. Like what if we had another H1 tag and we typed in second H1 tag? You'll notice right now, if we refresh our page, it's the exact same font size. So we don't want that. We only want to reference our welcome header in this example. Of course, in your site, if you wanted to reference every single H1 tag, that's what you would do. But now you'll notice if we refresh, the first one's big and the second one's not. Now, let's duplicate this. And we're going to call this third H1 tag. Okay, so an ID is used whenever its value will never be duplicated. So we will only have one welcome header on this page, and we will never need to give anything else an ID of welcome header. So that's why we use an ID. However, in most circumstances, you don't even need to bother using IDs in CSS. You use something called a class. And in this one, we're going to type in red-header. And now with a class, you can make multiple called the same one. So that's the difference between IDs and classes. Now it will actually let you duplicate an ID, but it's not supposed to. And it's bad practice to do so. So if you want something with duplicate CSS, you use a class. And then if we type in dot, which means class, red-header. If we type in color, :red, and then we refresh our page, you'll notice that both of them are red, and it's because both of them have the class of red-header. And now we can actually add multiple CSS things to each other and IDs to each other. So by that I mean if I type in class red-header on the top H1 and then I refresh the page, it will apply both classes or both CSS things. So it'll apply both welcome header and red header. So if we go back to our CSS and type in underline, then if we type in text dash decoration underline, then we save, we can give multiple classes by putting a space between them. So then if we do that, you'll notice these two will now have an underline and the top one won't. Yep. So you can mix and match multiple underlines. This would be the way too that like a link automatically has an underline, and we'll get to that. So if you want to get rid of it, you could add like text decoration to none, but we'll get to that later. So for now, I'm going to delete these two H1 tags. You can leave them there if you want. Actually, I can just comment them out. And now they're there to see, but they won't render in the body. Okay.